There are places where people don't go just like that. They transfer there for correctness, for an inconvenient character, for the fact that you don't know how to remain silent when necessary. A remote forestry area on the border of a protected area stood without a caretaker for 3 years. For 3 years no one saw anything. Found the first traces. And on the 5th he heard a knock on the door. There was a girl standing behind the door. Wet. With a flashlight. From a phrase that he never expected to hear in his life. The folder with the department's files was so thin that Pavel at first decided it was just empty inside. It turned out, almost. Viktor Sergeyevich, the head of the regional forestry enterprise, put it on the table and immediately took up the pen. He twisted it between his fingers, clicked the cap, twisted it again. It was a good pen. Expensive, obviously more expensive than the salary allowed. These are the things that form the first impression of a person, and Pavel made a mental note. 3 years without a permanent caretaker, the boss said, without looking at Pavel. The land was broken up, no documentation was kept. You live in a hut, putting things in order. Pavel opened the folder. Inside were 3 sheets, a map of the site point 10 years ago, an active acceptance of a hut and someone's telephone number without a signature on a piece of paper. For 3 years, not a single report. Not a single inspection report. Not a single record. As if the site did not exist at all, as if it had been crossed out from some list and forgotten to be returned, and the previous forester, Pavel asked, leafing through the empty space. Where did it go? Viktor Sergeyevich stopped turning the handle. The pause was short, but noticeable. He left, he said briefly and again began to click the cap. Where did he go? Where are people leaving? Said the boss and finally raised his gaze. There was something in him that looked like fatigue, not today's, accumulated. Don't be too heroic there. Look around first. He didn't add anything else. He just signed the directions and handed them across the table so quickly, as if he wanted to end the conversation as quickly as possible. Semyonik was carrying boards to the village and agreed to drop them off without further ado. He simply nodded to the passenger seat and set off. The first 20 minutes were silent. Outside the window, the fields gave way to copses, copses to forests. The forest became thicker and darker, as if the road did not go forward, but down, underground, to where there is no sun. Are you going far? Semyonik finally asked. Pavel named the section. The driver was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Pavel managed to notice and detect. The places are good, Semyonik said and looked in the side mirror. Although there was no one behind, the people are normal. You just need to be more careful there. Be careful with what? Pavel clarified. The road is here. Semyonik nodded towards the track. In the fall it will be very bad. It will wash away. He talked about the road for another 5 minutes, in detail, with details that no one asked for. Where is it better to go around? Where to put gravel? Where is it pointless? Pavel listened and thought that no one asked him about the road. At the fork, Semyonik slowed down, but the engine didn't turn it off. Further on foot. There are 3 kilometers, he said, looking out the windshield. Good luck. And he left without waiting for an answer. The hut stood on the edge, strong, made of logs, seemingly suitable for life, except for waist-deep grass, skewed shutters and a woodpile tilted at such an angle that it seemed to be held up solely on principle. Pavel walked around its perimeter, first then to enter. Professional habit, first from the outside. At the northern wall the grass was flattened, a wide strip, not animal, human. Not at the entrance, but on the side, at the corner. Why stand at the corner? It is not clear. Maybe they were smoking? Maybe they were waiting. Inside it smelled of dust and dry wood. On the table lay a note, handwritten, without a signature, firewood in the barn. Don't joke with the forest. Pavel read it twice. The letters were even, the handwriting was calm, the man was in no hurry. Who left it and when is an unanswered question. He put the note in his pocket and began to sort things out. He'll think about it later. On the second day, he went north with a map. He didn't tea like the map back in his office, it was too clean for the lands that no one had checked for 3 years. Now he didn't tea like it doubly. The clearing went in the wrong direction. The stream turned out to be 50 meters to the east, and where there was an empty square on the paper, a packed hunting trail was discovered. Crowded is not the right word. The trail was alive. Grass along the edges are trampled, the branches at shoulder level are broken off on both sides. They walked here regularly and for many years. Along the path there was a deep rut, a wide tread, a characteristic pattern of an ATV. The ground was thoroughly crushed. We traveled a lot, judging by the clarity of the trail, all this season, and did not report to anyone. Pavel carefully wrote down in a notebook, coordinates, description, with ruts. I drew a diagram in the margins. Somewhere far away, about 2 kilometers away, at least, something was humming. A motor or an echo, it was difficult to understand. He stopped, listened, counting the seconds. The sound disappeared as suddenly as it appeared. He returned home by a different route. Why he himself would not explain. On the 3rd day I went to the village. There are 30 yards, maybe a little more, one street, a shop, a post office in one building, a well with a new log house near the last house. A new log house on an old foundation. Someone has invested. The saleswoman Ludmila Ivanovna looked at him with that calm attentiveness that rural saleswomen have developed over many years. At one glance, who is he, where is he from, for how long, new forester? She asked, weighing the buckwheat. A permanent appointment, Pavel answered, for a few years at least. Ludmila Ivanovna froze for a second. Just a little, almost imperceptibly. Then she smiled, well, good. We need a forester here. In the far corner of the store there were 2 men. When Pavel looked back, they were looking in the other direction, with that deliberate indifference, which in itself says the opposite. A minute later left without buying anything. On the notice board, under a cloudy piece of plastic, hung a piece of paper, faded almost to white, lost dog. The date in the corner was difficult to guess, 3 years ago. No one took it off. By the end of the 4th day, the hut already looked inhabited. Things were laid out, a work jacket was hanging on a nail at the entrance. On the table was a map with pencil marks on top. Printing press. Your own map, alive. Already more honest than the one issued by the forestry enterprise. Pavel sat over a notepad and wrote down questions. Who rode an ATV and how often? Why is the trail so crowded? Why didn't the previous forester draw up a single document for 3 years, and where did he end up? The boss said, he left. Semyonik said, be more careful. These were 2 different answers to the same question, and neither of them was real. At 20:40 a.m. shot came from somewhere in the northwest. 1. Then silence, complete, dense, as if the forest was holding its breath and waiting. Pavel looked at his watch. Hunting at that time was prohibited. Wrote in a notebook, day 4th, 21:02, single shot, northwest. Made a point. Closed the notebook. Lay down. It took a long time to fall asleep. On the 5th day in the evening it began to rain, autumnal, methodical, as if for a long time. Pavel was reading by candlelight. The stove was finally working normally, the hut was warm and almost cozy, if you didn't think about what was outside. There was a knock on the door 3 times, unhurriedly. A girl stood on the threshold. Wet through, in rubber boots, dark hair stuck to her forehead. A flashlight in her hand. She looked straight, without a smile, without apology for the late hour. My father said that you need a wife, she said evenly, as if she was reading from a piece of paper. He told me to come meet you. Pause. Then she added more quietly, a little to the side, as if not to Paul, but to himself, I didn't want to. But it's not customary for us to argue with father. Pavel looked at her, not at the words, but at the face. The words and the face did not match. The words were submissive, but the face was not. He stepped back from the door, clearing the passage. Come in, he said, there is tea. Zoya entered, and the first thing she did was look around. Not with the absent-minded look with which one looks around someone else's room out of politeness, but carefully, the left corner, the table, the shelf, the window. As one looks around a place about which you will need to tell something later. She took off the jacket herself, without asking. She reached for the hanger at the entrance, the same one on which his jacket hung, and hung it next to it. Then she saw. She took it off, hung it on the back of the chair. She sat down at the table, folded her hands evenly in front of her, straightened her back. Pavel put the kettle on the stove and fell silent. He waited. The silence lasted for a good minute. The kettle began to hum quietly on the stove, as if it had decided to take over the conversation. "Are you staying here for a long time?" Zoya finally asked, without raising her eyes from the table. "For several years," Pavel answered, taking out the mugs. "Permanent appointment." Pause. "And you've been here all your life?" "Almost," she said. And she didn't answer this question anymore. She just took the mug that he put in front of her with both hands, as if she was warming herself, although the tea hadn't been poured yet. Pavel made strong tea, out of habit. Zoya took a sip, didn't wince, either she liked it or knew how not to show it. She sat down opposite. "Your father," he began, and she immediately tensed her shoulders a little, almost imperceptibly. "He is serious about wife?" Zoya looked at the mug. "He is used to making decisions," she said evenly. She didn't explain, didn't justify. She simply named a fact that had long been taken into account, as they call the weather or the distance to the village. Pavel was waiting for continuation. "He wasn't there. Is he a kind person?" he asked carefully. "He is not evil," she answered. "It's just that he was always allowed. As far as I remember, no one said no to him, and he was used to the way it should be." It was not a complaint or an excuse. It was an accurate portrait, in a few words, without unnecessary colors. "And you yourself were allowed to say no?" Pavel asked quietly. Zoya looked up. For the first time in the whole evening, not at the table, not at the mug, but directly at him. She held this gaze for several seconds, silently, as they look when the question has hit the mark, and they still don't intend to answer it. Then she took the mug and drank tea. The notebook lay on the edge of the table. Pavel forgot to put it away after the evening notes. The page was open with pencil marks and a trail map. Nothing secret, but not for anyone either. Strangers? Zoya glanced at him with her peripheral vision, barely noticeable, almost by accident. But Pavel was sitting opposite, and his angle of vision was good. He took the notebook and closed it, without haste, without explanation, as one closes something that is closed simply out of habit and does not consider it necessary to explain it. "Have you already walked around the site?" Zoya asked. "I go every day," said Pavel. "Work?" Zoya nodded. Something changed in her face, quite a bit, almost imperceptibly, as the expression changes when a person receives an answer to a question that he did not ask out loud. Then she was silent. She looked at the table. The rain outside the window was noisy, without abating. Then the conversation turned to the forest, and Zoya suddenly became different. She didn't relax, no. But she seemed to open up a little bit, like a window that hasn't been touched for a long time. "Behind the third cordon there is a tract," she said, leaning her elbows on the table. "Moose come there every autumn. There is an old salt lick there, even from my grandfather I remember from childhood." "It's not marked on the map," said Pavel. "There is a lot of things not on the map," she answered without irony, simply as a fact. "Do you know the burnt wedge? Black hole, long ford?" Pavel shook his head. Zoya named places without decoration, without explanation, as they list well-known things to someone who has not yet seen them. He took out a map and marked them with a pencil. Zoya followed his hand. Slowed down for a second, then continued. "The burnt wedge is beautiful," she said. "There was a fire there about 20 years ago, now a young aspen tree has grown. It's very quiet to walk there in the spring." "You know the forest well," said Pavel. "I grew up here," Zoya answered. And again something closed, like a window closes when it blows from the wrong direction. She got up when the rain outside the window did not seem to stop. She took the jacket off the back of the chair, put it on. The jacket was still wet. She didn't wince. She took the lantern, which she placed at the threshold when she entered. "I'll see you off," said Pavel. "No need," Zoya answered, clicking the button of the lantern. "I know the way." He didn't argue. He reached the threshold. She was already on the porch. Zoya stopped. She turned around. "I'll tell my father that we met," Zoya said evenly. There was a short pause, 2 beats. "He will be pleased," Zoya added more quietly, a little to the side. And she walked across the clearing. The lantern swayed in her hand, drew a white stripe across the wet grass, flashed between the birches and disappeared. Pavel stood in the doorway, looking into the darkness. Then he returned totable. Opened the notebook, flipped to today's page. Took a pencil. Wrote, "Zoya, the daughter of someone from the locals. Knows the forest." Was tense. Crossed out the last word. Wrote, "Careful." Crossed out again. Held the pencil over the paper, a second, 2, 3. Closed the notebook. Sat down. On the table stood her mug, almost full, with a dark ring at the edge. She almost didn't drink tea. She came, sat, left. Pavel looked at the mug longer than it deserved. Behind 3 vegetable gardens and an old bathhouse, in the last house on the north side, the light was burning. Fyodor was sitting at the table alone. A thin dark cigarillo was smoldering in the ashtray. He was in no hurry to light the next one. He just sat and looked at the table. Big, broad-shouldered, even occupying the space when he didn't move. When the door opened and Zoya came in, wet, with a lantern in her hand, he looked at her briefly and questioningly. "I met," Zoya said, hanging her jacket on a hook by the door. "Normal." "What did you see?" asked Fyodor. Zoya thought for exactly a second. "A map," she answered, "a notebook with notes. Walks around the site every day." Fyodor took a cigarillo, twirled it in his fingers, without lighting it. It was bad news, and he was already waiting for it, which is why he was not surprised. He was just thinking about it. "How is he holding up?" he asked. "Calmly," said Zoya, nervous. "Writes everything down." Fyodor nodded slowly. He finally lit a cigarette, exhaled smoke towards the ceiling. "Come again," he said quietly, "make friends." Zoya did not answer anything. She went into her room. The door closed quietly, without a clap. Fyodor looked at the closed door for a few more seconds. Then he looked at the door again. Table. It was raining outside the window. Pavel almost passed by the first trap. And he would have passed, if not for the glare of the sun on the metal from under the leaves. He stopped. He squatted down, examined without touching. The trap lay under a layer of rotten leaves. The spring was lubricated, no rust, installed recently. New. Pavel looked around slowly. The second one, 10 steps to the right, at the root 8. The third, behind the bush, a little further. All 3 are placed at an angle, as people do who know exactly where the animal comes from on the path. Zoya yesterday talked about the moose at the 3rd cordon. He went to look with his own eyes and found something he did not expect. He took out his phone, photographed methodically, each trap, the ground around, the general plan. Then he took out a notebook, drew a diagram of the location, wrote down the coordinates. Near the outermost trap in the soft ground, there was a deep rut, a wide tread of an ATV, a characteristic pattern. The ground was pressed down thoroughly. "We went here more than once." I wrote it down. The birds around were silent. When he straightened up, putting away the phone, his back felt cold. Not from the wind. The feeling of someone else's gaze was dense, heavy, as if someone was looking at the back of the head through a sight or simply through a thick spruce forest. Pavel slowly turned his head. The forest stood like a wall. Not a branch crunched, nor a bird flew up. But the forest saw him. And the one who was in the forest, too. He returned to the hut in the first hour and found Zoya at the porch. She stood in a bundle, looked at him calmly, as people who are used to waiting and do not consider it burdensome look. "Father said that you don't have normal food," she explained. She, holding out a bundle, "potatoes, bread, pickles, how does he know?" asked Pavel. "Everyone in the village knows everything," Zoya answered and went into the hut first. "We had dinner at the same table as last night." The conversation this time went on easier, without that density of the first evening, when every word was weighed before uttering it. Zoya asked about the city. "Is it big? Is it noisy? Is there any forest there?" and listened carefully, tilting her head slightly to the side. Pavel answered, "The cucumbers turned out to be good." "They hunt here?" Pavel asked, clearing away the plates. "Everyone hunts," Zoya answered, watching with her eyes how he folds the dishes. "Places like this." "In the protected area too," he clarified evenly, as if this was just the next question on a long work list. Zoya looked at the table. "I don't know where your protected area is," she said. Pavel took out a map, spread it out. He ran his finger along the red dotted line. The border ran along the northern slope, went around the tract, went to the third cordon. Zoya looked. The face is calm, too even for a person who sees it for the first time and learns something important. "Almost no one goes there," she finally said. "Definitely." Pavel nodded and wrote something down in a notebook. Zoya followed his hand, silently, did not ask what exactly. "Do you want me to show you the burnt wedge?" she suggested when he put the map away. "You marked it on the map, but haven't seen it yet. It's beautiful there." They walked together. Zoya moved confidently, never hesitated, didn't take a wrong turn, walked as if along her own corridor. Pavel walked a little behind and looked not only at her feet. About halfway along the way, she took a left, walked around a small creek in a long arc. Directly it would have been half as long. Pavel didn't say anything. "I remember." The burnt wedge opened immediately, a clearing among the charred trunks, a young aspen tree already waist deep, and such silence that one could hear the leaves settling. They stopped nearby. Zoya looked at the trunks. Pavel, there too. It was not hard to remain silent. It was a different silence, for the first time in both days. "Do you like it here?" Zoya asked, without turning around. Pavel was silent for a second. "For real, not for show." "Yes," he answered, "more than I expected. Usually city people don't last long," said Zoya. Not mockingly, just as an observation accumulated over the years. "I'm not ordinary," said Pavel. Zoya turned and looked at him. Not the way she looked last night when she assessed the situation. Just she looked, without calculation, without a second thought, as they look at something that turned out not to be what they expected. "Maybe," she said quietly. And she turned back to the trunks. On the way back, Pavel went first. Deliberately chose a different route, through the same ravine that Zoya had bypassed. She followed, did not object, looked at her feet. In the ravine, under a fallen birch tree, lay a hairfresh, cut quickly and cleanly. This is what people do who have a full hand. Nearby in the ground there was a trace of a wide tread, already familiar. Pavel stopped. He took out the phone, took a photo, calmly, businesslike, without commenting. He put the phone in his pocket. Zoya stood 2 steps behind. Her shoulders were tense. He saw it without turning around, because he realized how her gait had changed even on the way to the valley. She didn't ask what he was photographing. Then they walked in silence. Not the same silence that was at the burnt wedge, another, dense, waited. At the hut Zoya stopped herself. "Tomorrow, maybe I'll come," she said, looking slightly to the side. "I'll be glad," Pavel answered. He walked her to the edge of the clearing. At the turn, she looked back, saw that he was standing and watching. She didn't smile. But there was something in his face. It became a little softer than it was, as happens when you thought that they weren't watching you, but it turned out they were. Pavel returned to the hut. Put the kettle on. He took out a notebook, opened a diagram of 3 traps at the third cordon. He added a 4th, the one from the valley. Then he outlined with a pencil the area that Zoya had walked around in a long, neat arc. He closed the notebook. Outside the window the forest stood calmly, like a man who has secret, and he knows about it, and is in no hurry. Pavel saw the forest. I saw the traces. I saw the routes. He put the picture together carefully, point by point. But there is one thing that he does not yet know. One detail that Zoya keeps to herself. And when it comes to light, not only his attitude towards the land will change. Everything that began to take shape between them will change. Fyodor did not knock. He simply opened the door and entered, as if entering a place where the location of the furniture has long been known. Pavel was just sitting over the map. He looked up and immediately realized who it was, although he was seeing it for the first time. The man was large. He occupied the doorway effortlessly, as people occupy it, who have plenty of space everywhere and who have long been accustomed to it. In one hand there is a bottle, in the other a piece of smoked meat, wrapped in paper, still warm. The smell came immediately, thick, with smoke. A wide, homely smile, like that of a person who has come not to visit, but to himself. "Well, what, neighbor, are you settling in?" said Fyodor, already sitting down on the stool, the same one on which Zoya usually sat. He sat down thoroughly, without asking, as one sits down in one's own home. "I'm settling in," answered Pavel. His gaze lingered on the package of meat. "What kind of prey?" "Loose meat," said Fyodor, and put the bottle on the table with a light, almost delicate knock. "Everything is clear with the permit, don't be afraid. We have order here." Pavel nodded. He didn't ask about permission. "For now." Fyodor spoke slowly, deliberately, as a man says who has no reason to rush, not now, not in general in life. He looked around the hut while he spoke, calmly, with the air of an owner accepting a report about the state of the property. "We have our own rules here," he began. "We're used to it in our own way. The forest is big, there is enough for everyone, it's not cramped." Pause. The previous forester understood that people need to live. He was a normal guy, easygoing. Pavel listened, did not agree, didn't he interrupt, waited to see where it would go. "You're a young man, smart," Fyodor continued and looked at him with something akin to respect, "carefully measured out, exactly as much as needed." Fyodor extended his hand and took hold of Pavel's map. Turned it towards him. He ran a rough finger with a black border under the nail along the line of the clearing, slowly, with pressure, as if erasing a pencil mark. "The cards lie," he said, without raising his eyes. "And people, especially, you don't need extra enemies. You yourself understand. And who are the extra ones here?" "Enemies?" asked Pavel. Fyodor laughed, quietly, good-naturedly, as one laughs at a good joke. "No one," he said. "What I mean is that you can live in a good way. Like a neighbor." He waved his hand, a gesture that at once covered the hut, the forest outside the window, and the entire area. "This is not a city. Everything is in plain sight here. Everyone helps each other." The last one sounded soft, almost sincerely. And that is why Pavel remembered this word for word, just as one remembers not what is said loudly, but what is said quietly. Fyodor spoke about Zoya himself. Pavel did not expect and did not lead him to this. "She is independent," he said, and his voice changed, became a little different, alive, without that measured softness with which he spoke about the forest in order. "A good girl. She has character, not a weakling. My mother died early, I was the only one who raised. It wasn't easy, what to say. She knows the forest well," said Pavel, "and already knows. The memory is good, the head is working." Pavel looked at him. In the way Fyodor said it, in the pace, in the direction his gaze went, there was truth. Not the kind that is said for the sake of impression. Just the truth. "You are kind to her," Fyodor said and smiled again, wider than necessary, again with a precisely measured amount of warmth. "I will appreciate everything." Getting up, Fyodor slapped Pavel on the shoulder, heavy, short, like putting an end to a conversation that is not discussed. "Come in, if anything. The house is behind the birches, you'll find it yourself." He moved towards the exit, without hurrying, with the wide stride of a man who has nowhere to hurry. He stopped at the threshold. Turned around. "I've been here for 30 years, he said. Lesnikov saw different. All sorts of things. Pause, 2 blows, the good ones got along. The rest left. The door closed. Didn't he slam? Just closed. Carefully, tightly." Pavel remained looking at her for a few more seconds. Then he turned his gaze to the table. There stood an unopened bottle and a bundle of smoked meat, from which the smell still emanated. Thick, regular, such that one wanted to unwrap it. He didn't touch either one or the other. He sat down. He took out a notebook. He went through the conversation. Word by word, slowly, like going through the contents of one's pockets in search of something that is certain. There. Wrote, Theodore. Knows the area. Talks about the forest as special. Came himself, without an invitation. Wrote below, the good ones got along. The rest left. Not a threat. Worse. Looked out the window, towards the birches, behind which stood someone else's house. Then wrote the last thing, checked the mining permit in the area. Closed the notebook. Meat in the package smelled good, really good, the way only something smoked over alderwood can smell. Pavel pushed the package to the edge of the table and opened the card. Zoya came in the afternoon. She came in, took off her jacket, put something she had brought on the table and only then looked at it. She looked and asked right away, "Did something happen?" "Father came in," said Pavel. She froze, very briefly, for one breath, for a second, which is easy to miss if you don't look carefully. Then she pulled herself together, calmly, habitually, the way people who have been doing this for a long time pull themselves together. "What did you say?" she asked evenly. Pavel recited briefly, without intonation, only the content. He looked at her face while he spoke. It remained calm, but not relaxed, like the surface of a river in calm weather, under which there is something of its own. "He is like that with everyone," Zoya said, "hospitable." "Yes," said Pavel. "And didn't he add anything?" They drank tea in silence longer than usual. Then Zoya spoke herself, openly, about childhood. How he took her into the forest early in the morning, before dawn, and they walked through the dew, and he showed the track of a moose in the mud by the stream and said, "Look, old or fresh, you can see around the edges." How she asked, and he answered patiently, without irritation, always. "I thought then, he knows everything," she said quietly, looking into her mug. About the forest, absolutely everything. There was nothing in her voice. Bitterness, no melancholy, just something living that could not fit into one word and did not ask to be contained. Pavel listened. Looked at her and thought, here is a person inside of whom two truths live at the same time, and both are real, and she herself does not yet know what to do with it. "Are you angry with him?" Zoya asked suddenly. She looked up. "No," Pavel answered. "I think." Zoya looked at him for a second, carefully, the way they look when they want to understand whether it's true. Then she lowered her gaze again into the mug. Outside the window, the wind shook the tops of the birches, back and forth, leisurely. Pavel cooked the soup with the look of a man who knows exactly what he is doing, and that was what was funniest of all. Zoya was sitting on a stool, watched him stir something brown in a saucepan, held a mug of tea with both hands and was silent. She was silent for a long time, with increasing effort. Then she couldn't stand it, threw back her head and really laughed, closed her eyes, her shoulders shook, and this was the first time in 3 weeks that she laughed like that, without looking back, without control, simply because it's funny. "It's called a recipe," said Pavel, without turning around. "Which recipe?" She exhaled through laughter. "Intuitive," he answered, "the most reliable." They ate all the soup. Zoya, with the expression on the face of a person overcoming circumstances, but with an addition. 3 weeks have passed since that rainy evening when she stood on the threshold with a lantern and said a memorized phrase. Now she came almost every day, for no reason, without bundles of food, she just came. They learned to be silent together, not the silence that was on the first evening, dense, wary, but another in which you can sit and not explain why you came. Pavel noticed this. And noticed something else. He began to wait for her steps on the porch, in the morning, after lunch, at any time. This bothered him. The notebook lay on the table, and the notes in it were not gone anywhere. An envelope from the regional center arrived on the 4th day after the request, thin, official, with a corner stamp from the forestry department. Pavel opened it at the table while the kettle was warming up. He skimmed the answer. He reread it more slowly. No permit for moose hunting in this area has been issued for the last 3 years. Not a single one, not in one name. He photographed the document, put it in a folder, put the folder in his backpack. He got up, walked to the window and back. Fyodor's elk meat illegal. He assumed this from the very beginning, but it's one thing to assume, another thing to hold a paper with the official seal in your hands. So far only indirect. Photos of traps, a hair carcass, a tread mark, a response from the area. There is no direct evidence yet, direct evidence is needed. He opened the journal. He wrote down the date, the content of the answer. Closed it. The kettle whistled. The next day Zoya came earlier than usual. "Let us go to Longford," she said from the threshold, not yet entering. Just like that. Without a map. Without a notepad. Pavel looked at the backpack, then at her. Without everything, she confirmed. He left the notebook on the table. He took only his jacket. Zoya led a different path, not a work one, not a short one, but the one she apparently walked herself when she walked just like that. She stopped without warning. At the old willow, leaning over the path so low that she had to bend down. She only said, "I read here as a child. Here, on this route, it's like a seat." Then by a stone, flat and wide, on the very bank of the ford, Mom and I were sitting here. She loved to listen to the water. She said that she was thinking out loud. These were small things. But Pavel heard the difference. It was not what they say on behalf of. It was his own, personal, something that is not shown to everyone. He told in response about an apartment on the 5th floor in the city, where from the window only the roof of the neighboring house was visible, about how one day he woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and could not understand why it was hard for him. And then he realized, it's just not here's silence. About the first morning here, when he opened the window and stood for about 10 minutes, just listened. Zoya listened carefully, did not interrupt, only nodded sometimes, as one listens to something that cannot be fully understood, but one wants to. The stones at the ford were wet from the splashes. The water moved quickly, rolled over the boulders, seethed near the shores. Zoya stepped onto the nearest stone, then onto the next one, and on the third she slipped. Pavel reacted before he had time to think, caught her hand, held it. All this took a second, an ordinary, working one. But she didn't let go of her hand right away. She held it for another second, then unclenched her fingers, stepped onto the shore and began to look into the water. Her hair fell forward, her face was not visible. "It's beautiful here," she said. "Yes," Pavel answered. "I wasn't looking at the water." They walked back leisurely. Forest it got dark, the sun went behind the clouds, and everything became a little quieter, a little softer, as happens when the day is past the middle and began to think about the end. "Are you really going to stay here?" Zoya asked without turning around. "4 years, I plan," he said. "Why do you need this place?" She stopped and turned around. "You're a city. There is nothing here." He thought for a second, for real, not choosing words for effect. "Because what I do is important here," he said. "In the city it won't felt at all. As if everything you do, you could not do, nothing would change." Zoya looked at him. Then she went forward again. "I never left," she said quietly, looking under legs. "I don't know what it's like to leave and come back. Or to leave and not return." Pause. "A branch crunched under my foot, loud as a shot. I don't know whether to envy or not," she added. As if she was not talking to him, but thinking out loud to herself. Pavel walked alongside and said nothing. Sometimes nothing is better. The hut appeared from behind the trees, and Fyodor was standing at the porch. Pavel saw him immediately. Fyodor looked at them as they walked through the clearing. Calmly, with the expression of a man who sees what he expected to see, and that suits him completely. "Well done, daughter," he said to Zoya when they approached. Simply, without lowering his voice, in front of Pavel, as if it were right was self-evident, as if Pavel wasn't here. Zoya blushed, quickly, up to her ears, to the roots of her hair. For the first time in all the time that Pavel knew her. She looked somewhere towards the roof, where there was nothing interesting. Pavel turned his gaze to Fyodor. Then at Zoya. She didn't look at anyone. Fyodor nodded to Pavel, in a neighborly way, briefly, as one nods to a good person to an acquaintance, and walked away, whistling something quiet and shapeless. He walked slowly, his hands in his pockets, like a person for whom everything is going according to plan. Zoya stood and looked after him. A long pause. A woodpecker knocked in the forest, the third one, and fell silent. "To get acquainted," she answered without turning around. "Only?" asked Pavel. Zoya did not answer. Raised the collar of her jacket, slowly, with both hands, although the air was warm and windless. Then she walked through the clearing to the forest, quickly, without looking back, steps short and clear on the grass. Pavel looked after her. Raised collar. Hands in pockets. Quick steps, and she disappeared behind the trees, and only the trampled grass remained. He stood still. A little. I went into the hut. I took a notebook, the one that I had deliberately left on the table without a notepad. I looked at the blank page for a long time. I didn't write anything. The elk was lying on its side, and the first thing Pavel thought was, how quiet. There were no signs of a struggle, no disorder around. The crushed grass all around, the smell of fresh blood, and the professional accuracy of the cutting. The one that distinguishes a person who has done this hundreds of times from someone who has done it for the first time. The carcass is large, an adult male, good horns. Part of the meat was taken away. The rest was left, not from negligence, but because you can't take so much at once. Pavel did not move from his place for 10 seconds. He stood and watched. Then he took out his phone. He took pictures methodically, without haste, the whole carcass, the cut, the ground around, traces at the edge of the clearing. I counted 23 frames before I got Tourette's. The same tread of an ATV. He recognized it immediately, as one recognizes the handwriting of a person who has been read for a long time. A wide pattern, characteristic protrusions. He measured the width, 62 centimeters. He wrote down the depth, direction in a notebook. He raised his head. The trail went south, towards the village. He was about to get up when he saw a cigarette butt, lying at the root of the nearest spruce, almost trampled, as if it had just been put down. Dark brown paper, a golden rim near the filter, the same thin cigarillo that he saw in Fyodor's ashtray. He took a bag for samples out of his pocket, carefully removed the cigarette butt, zipped it up. He stood up. Looked again at the carcass, at the horns, at how skillfully the cut was made. The black hole was 200 meters away. From here. The protected area has been here since his first day. Pavel went to the village not along the main street, but through the backyards, along the vegetable gardens, behind the old bathhouses, where people don't just walk. Fyodor's house stood on the extreme north side, large, strong, with a new canopy near the barn. From the side of the neighbor's fence, the canopy was clearly visible. The ATV stood under a tarpaulin, but the tarpaulin was thrown carelessly. On the right the side is open, the wheel sticks out. The tread is clearly visible. A wide pattern, the same characteristic protrusions. Pavel did not come close. He looked from the fence, squinting, for about 15 seconds, no more. Then he turned and went to the store. It coincided. Not 100%, without measurements you can't really say, but close enough to stop doubting the direction. Ludmila Ivanovna I was wiping down the counter when he came in. There was no one else in the store. It was a quiet weekday hour, even the flies behaved with restraint. Outside the window it was dripping from the roof. Are there a lot of ATVs in the village? Pavel asked, looking at the shelf with canned food, Yes, almost everyone has it, she answered, without stopping wiping. In the fall, you can't go anywhere without it, you can't get through the roads, you can't get through it by car. Pavel took the can of stew, turned it over in his hands without much interest, and put it back. What does he live on? He asked. Works somewhere, Ludmila Ivanovna stopped the rag. She looked at him carefully, with the caution that is developed by people who are accustomed to weighing words on small precise scales before pronouncing them. He has the farm, she said finally. He hunts. A short pause. In general, he lives. I see, said Pavel. Thank you, Ludmila Ivanovna. He took the bread, paid and left. There was silence behind. She didn't move the rag anymore. Zoya appeared at the hut before he could reach the store, stood on the porch with a bundle and smiled. Not that cautious, crooked smile that sometimes flashed through her against her will. But normally, immediately, at the sight of him, as they smile at a person whom they are glad to see and do not think of hiding it. Something inside Pavel swayed, uncomfortable at the wrong time, completely inappropriate. He smiled back. We had lunch, talked about nothing, about how the J has been stealing bread from the windowsill every day and at the same time pretending that nothing is happening, and about the book that Zoya has been reading for the second month and can't finish reading, because it's a pity to finish. Pavel listened and answered, and it was a good day, one of those rare days when you don't think about what you're thinking. He didn't say a word about the moose. About the carcass, not a word about the rut, about the cigarette, but in the bag that lay in the backpack against the wall. Zoya was already collecting the bundle when she remembered, in passing, to some other conversation, without attaching importance, Dad rode an ATV yesterday. To the north side. He says the old salt lick needs to be fixed, it's completely overgrown. She said it the way they say about the weather or that the salt on the shelf has run out, evenly, without looking at him, tying a knot. Pavel brought the mug to his lips. He put it back on the table. All this took exactly the same amount of time as it took for the face to remain a face. I see, said. Zoya was already talking about something else, about the book again, about the fact that the main character does stupid things there and she is angry for him. He heard her voice. Slava, not very much. After she left, the hut became quiet, that special silence that happens in a room where someone has just been and is no longer there. Pavel sat down at the table. Opened the notebook, flipped to today's page. He wrote, Zoya said, Fyodor was in the north yesterday. The day coincides with the carcass. Looked out the window. It was getting dark, autumn was taking its toll, and it began to get dark earlier than even a month ago. The birches stood motionless behind the glass. He took out a blank sheet of paper. He wrote on top, report. The date. His name. The first two lines are essentially, dry, official, as expected. Stopped. Looked at what was written. Tucked the sheet away in folder. I wasn't thinking about Fyodor. I was thinking about Zoya. About the way she said it, about the ATV, in passing, tying a knot, without looking up. 3 options, a random mention, just talking about her father's affairs. Or she knew that he knew, and checked to see if he would say anything. Or she didn't know anything at all, and the mention was a pure coincidence. 3 options. He wasn't sure of any of them. Pavel got up and went to the window. The bag with the cigarette butt was lying on the edge of the table, transparent, small, with a dark cigarette butt inside. The golden rim glittered in the light of the lamp. The proof that he has, photographs of the carcass, a measured track, a response from the district about the lack of permits for elk hunting, a cigarette butt with a characteristic filter. This is almost enough. Almost does not mean enough. He said to himself, we need one more direct proof. Direct, that means irrefutable. He said it and listened to whether it sounded true. The truth didn't sound quite right. He returned to the table. He took out the folder. He reread the written 2 lines of the report, even, official, irreversible. He folded the sheet in half. He put it in the folder. He put the folder in the backpack. He lay down. He closed his eyes. It was dark all around and completely uninformative. The wood in the stove was burning out, crackling quietly, once, twice, 3 times, and gradually fell silent. Pavel looked into the darkness until the moment when it was completely dark outside, and the forest outside the window ceased to be a forest and became just darkness. He did not fall asleep soon. He knows almost everything. There is only one thing left, to understand what Zoya knows. And how long ago. The next meeting with her will be different. He will no longer be able to listen to her as before. Or he will be able to. This is what will break everything that he has been building in recent weeks. Not proof. Not a report. One conversation. A package with a cigarette butt lay on the edge of the table, transparent, small, with a dark cigarette butt inside. The golden rim glittered. Pavel didn't he remove it on purpose? Just didn't he put it away? Zoya came in, said hello, took off her jacket. She looked around, as always, briefly, habitually. Her gaze slid over the table, over the package, then further. She did not stop at him, but Pavel saw that she had noticed. She sat down on a stool, reached for a mug. Pavel put the kettle on and stood by the stove with his back to her, looking at the fire, although the kettle did not require surveillance. The silence was not what it usually was. Their usual silence was light, lived in, like silence in a room where people have lived for a long time. It's fun. Are you angry about something? Zoya asked finally. No, Pavel answered faster than he should have. The kettle hissed. He took it off the fire. He poured tea, put the mugs. He sat down opposite. He waited until she took hers. She took it, wrapped her fingers around it, looked into the mug. Yesterday I was at the north side, he said evenly, without intonation, as they say about something working. He looked at her face. And how there? Zoya asked. Looking into the mug, not at him. I found something, said Pavel. Silence. Zoya didn't he ask what? She sat, held the mug and looked into the tea, as if something important was written there, and she waited until the letters appeared clearly. You're not asking what I found, Pavel said quietly. She didn't he answer. She put the mug on table, neatly, without knocking. The package with the cigarette butt lay between them. Neither she nor he looked at it. But both knew that it was there. The silence lasted for a long time. Not unbearably, but with every second it became denser, like the air in a room where they stopped opening the windows. Then Zoya looked up. Something moved in her face, not outside, inside, as happens when a person makes a decision that he has been putting off for a long time and which has not become better because of the postponement. Easier. I guess, she said quietly. From the very beginning? Pavel asked. Not from the very beginning, she answered, but early. Pause. Outside the window, the wind shook a birch branch, once, briefly, and again quietly. I didn't want to know for sure, she added, and it sounded not like an excuse, but like an honest diagnosis made to himself out loud. Pavel looked at her. Then he asked directly, without acceleration, without preparation, just the next question, your father put you under surveillance, me? Zoya did not look away. He wanted to understand if it was possible to come to an agreement with you, she said evenly. How did he negotiate with the past? And you came here for this? For the first time? Yes, she answered. The word first fell between them like a coin on the stone floor, loudly, clearly. Both heard it. Pavel was silent. He looked at her, at the hands that she put under the table, at the way she held her back, straight, without support, as people who had prepared for what would happen next held their backs, and then, he asked. Zoya finally looked at him for real, not past, not to the side, but directly. You yourself know, later, she said. Pavel stood up. He went to the window, slowly, not abruptly, and began to look at the forest. The birches behind the glass stood calmly, completely indifferent to what was happening inside the hut. The rain stopped yesterday, and the forest was quiet, autumn, even. Did you know about the moose? He asked, without turning around. The voice is even, but there is tension in the shoulders that you cannot hide. No, Zoya answered. I swear, I didn't know about the moose. At all. But about the traps. A long pause? Such that a lot of words could fit in it, but she didn't say a single unnecessary one. I didn't know where exactly, she said finally. I knew that happens. I knew for a long time. Pavel stood at the window. It was an honest answer, that's why it was the hardest thing with him. A lie can be picked up and put aside. The truth cannot be. He turned around. Zoya sat straight, her hands folded on the table, just like on the very first evening, when she stood wet on the threshold and uttered a memorized phrase from her father. Only now in this straight back there was no tension of someone else's task. It was something else, something that remains when a person decides not to hide. I have to file a report, said Pavel. I know, Zoya answered. Your father will end up under investigation. She looked at him directly, without trembling in her gaze, without trying to soften. I know. She didn't ask to wait. She didn't say, this is my father. She just sat and looked. A package with a cigarette butt lay on the table between them, small, transparent, with a golden rim inside. Pavel looked at her and thought that here she was? The difference between the one who came the first time and the one who is sitting now. The first time she came on orders. Now she sat herself and was silent about what she could say, and talked about what was honest. Zoya stood up. She took the jacket from the back of the chair, slowly, with the careful movement of the person who there is no hurry, because everything has already been said. Pavel did not move from his place. She reached the threshold. Stopped. She turned around and looked at him silently for several seconds, as they do when they are looking for words that would be accurate, and do not want to say inaccurate. I wouldn't have come so many times, she said quietly, if only I had been watching. Pause, she did not look away. This is not an excuse. I understand. The door closed, without a clap, quietly, as they close when they don't want to wake up someone sleeping. Pavel stood in the middle of the hut. He had nothing in his hands. The notebook lay on the table, closed. The bag with the cigarette butt was in the same place, at the edge. Her mug with half-drunk tea was where she had put it. He didn't sit down. He didn't go to the window. He just stood and listened to her steps fading away on porch, once, twice, 3 times, and then silence. Only the forest behind the glass, which explained nothing and promised nothing, and a bag with a cigarette butt, which lay and waited, and a mug with cooling tea. Pavel looked at the mug. Then he took it, poured the rest into the sink, put it upside down on a towel. That's all. Fyodor had dinner. Potatoes, bread, something in a frying pan, over low heat. He sat thoroughly, elbows on the table, he ate without haste. When the door opened and Zoya entered, he did not turn around, he only asked, without looking up from the plate, "How is your forester doing?" Zoya took off her boots. Walked to the table. She sat down opposite, did not take off her jacket, just unbuttoned the top button. She put her hands in front of her. Fyodor finally looked up. The fork stopped. "He knows," she said. "About the moose. About the traps. About the ATV." Fyodor put the fork on the table, carefully, without knocking. The plate with potatoes stood between. He said, not a question, but a version that he had already tried on. "No," Zoya answered, "he found it himself. He searches well. Methodically." Fyodor looked at her, pushed the plate away. "You should have stopped him," he said evenly, without raising his voice, which was worse than any scream. "I went for this, I couldn't," answered Zoya. "Why?" Zoya was silent. Outside the window, the shutter creaked. Whether it was the wind or by itself, you can't tell. Fyodor looked at his daughter for a long time, with that expression that people have when they understand something they didn't want to think about. He wasn't angry yet, he was thinking about it. "You fell in love, or what?" he said, not angrily, almost confused, as they say about something they didn't expect and don't know what to do with. "Dad," Zoya said. She didn't say anything else. Fyodor stood up. He went to the window and began to look into the darkness of the yard, a wide, dark silhouette against the background of glass, hands in his pockets. He was silent for a long time. When he spoke, the voice was quieter, and it was completely different, not pressure, but something that hid it for a long time and that became harder over the years. "I've been here for 30 years, he said, without turning around. "I know this forest better than any map. Better than any forester who was sent here. While he was listed as a government official, I fed him and protected him in my own way. I installed salt licks. I stopped felling when visitors started. Who knows about this? Nobody. It's not written down in the paper." Zoya listened. She had heard these words before, but not in this voice, without pressure, almost tiredly. "They'll put me in prison, you'll be left alone," Fyodor said and turned around. "Alone. Do you understand that?" It was the truth. Not reception, not pressure, just the truth, and both knew it, and this made it heavier than everything else. "Dad," Zoya said, "you have to stop. Leave his area. Completely. While there is time." Fyodor looked at her for a long time, as he looks at something that you don't want to believe in, but you have to. "I'll leave," he said finally. "If you tell him not to report submitted." "It's not my business what he serves," Zoya answered. "Yours," said Fyodor. "You can ask. He will listen to you, I see how he looks at you." Zoya looked at her father. There was logic in his words, simple, working, the one that he used all his life. "There is a lever, you need to push. Do you want me to go to him for you again?" she said quietly. Fyodor did not answer, turned to the window. Zoya stood up. She went up to him, stood next to him, also looked into the darkness behind the glass. The yard, the canopy, the silhouette of an ATV under the tarpaulin. She knew this yard by heart, every corner, every board. When she spoke, her voice was even, without trembling, without tears. "Dad. If you touch Pavel, if something happens to him, I'll go to the investigator myself. Do you hear, myself? I know where you hide the skins." Fyodor turned sharply from the window. There was so much heavy, bearish force in this movement that the mug on the table rattled. He took a step towards her, just one step, but the floor under him creaked pitifully. Zoya did not retreat, although instinct screamed, "Run!" She looked into his eyes, and for a second it seemed to her that he was going to hit. For the first time in her life. But he stopped. My shoulders sank, just a little, almost imperceptibly. "I don't want this," Zoya continued. "I ask you to leave the site. Not for him. For myself. Because I don't want to lose you like this, through the bars." She didn't wait for an answer. She walked to the door, put on her boots. She went out, closing it quietly behind her. Fyodor remained by the window. The potatoes on the table had long since cooled. At night, Zoya was sleeping. She sat in the kitchen, didn't turn on the light, only the moon was shining through the window, making everything silvery and flat. There was a mug with long cooled tea on the table. She poured the tea back and didn't drink a sip. I thought about my father. About how he taught her to read tracks, patiently, without irritation, every time again until she remembered. How he cooked porridge in the mornings after the death of her mother, bad, in clumps, but it cooked. Like once, when she was about 12 years old, she got lost in the forest for 2 hours, and he looked for her in silence, did not shout, and when he found her, he just said, "Go home," and walked behind her all the way so that he could see her back. She loved him. It was separate from everything else and did not cancel everything else. I thought about Pavel. About the fact that she spoke to him differently, without the burden of someone else's task for shoulders, without regard for what she would have to tell later. She just spoke. For the first time in a long time she just spoke. She thought to herself, and this was the hardest thing. How many times did she do what her father ordered and didn't he ask why? Not because she was afraid, because she was used to it, because it was always like this. The habit of living by someone else's decision is not a weakness and not a strength. It's just the absence of another habit. Hers. She got up and went to the window. Behind the glass the forest stood dark, pre-dawn, quiet, as the forest is quiet in those hours when the night hours have already fallen silent and the daytime hours have not yet begun. Not a sound. Only the moon at the edge of the sky, almost horizontal, almost morning. Zoya looked for a long time. Then she took her jacket. The smoke from the chimney of the hut was visible from the path, a thin, straight column in the windless morning air. Pavel is at home. Not sleeping. Zoya knocked 3 times, as always. He opened quickly, without a pause, as if he was standing at the door, just not sleeping, and heard her steps on the way. He looked at her silently, without a question, without surprise. Just looked. The morning air was cold, steam was coming from her mouth. "I didn't come to ask you to stop," Zoya said. Pause. Somewhere a bird cried briefly into the forest, and again there was silence. "I came to tell my father through you," she continued. "Tell him that I am asking him to leave the site. Himself. Before you submit a report." Pavel looked at her for a long time, carefully, as they do when they want to understand not the words, but what is behind the words. "Why through me?" he asked. Zoya did not look away. "Because I want you to know, I choose not him and not you," she said. "I choose to tell the truth. This is my decision. Not his, not yours, mine." Pavel was silent. He looked at her, at the jacket buttoned up to the throat, at the hands clenched in his pockets, at the face in which there was no request, no calculation. Only a decision made at night in the kitchen in the moonlight, when the quiet pre-dawn forest stood outside the window. He stepped back from the door, silently clearing the passage. "Come in," he said. Zoya entered. The door closed behind her. The morning forest remained outside, cold, quiet, with a thin column of smoke above the chimney, which stretched vertically upward and did not think of dissipating. She entered. The report is still in the folder. Fyodor does not yet know what his daughter has chosen. The next conversation will be between Zoya and her father, and this will be the first conversation in her life where she will say what she thinks, and not what is expected of her. What Fyodor will answer and what will remain after is the last thing that holds the story. Zoya spoke for a long time, longer than usual, and in a different way, without stopping, without looking back, as people say who have finally stopped choosing their words. Pavel sat opposite and listened. The teapot on the stove had long cooled down, no one stood up to warm it up, and he stood quietly, not offended. She talked about her childhood. How it smelled in the forest early in the morning, when her father led her by the hand through the dew, how he showed her where the elk lay in the heat and where the black grouse hid a nest, how one day she tripped over a root and burst into tears, but he did not regret it, he only said, "Look at your feet, not at the sky." How laughed when she mistakenly stepped into a beaver hole and flew out of her boot. It was a good childhood. She talked about it without bitterness, without trying to rewrite it retroactively. It was what it was, and nothing else was added to it. This story was about something else, how she saw traps and was silent. How she heard the conversations of her father's guests, late, quiet, with whom he spoke on the street, not in the house, and not she asked who and why. How she got used to not asking questions that could get an inconvenient answer. She said this not as an accusation to her father, but rather as a list of things that had been lying in her pocket for too long and were weighing him down more and more. When she finished, it was quiet in the hut, only the firewood crackled in the stove, once, twice. "Thank you for saying that," said Pavel. Zoya nodded. She looked at the cooled kettle, got up, put it on the fire. Got up and put it on, just like that, without words, like they put a kettle in a house where they often visit. "Will you still serve it?" she asked without turning around. "Yes," Pavel answered. She nodded, briefly, as one nods at something that they knew in advance and have already managed to get used to. "But first I'll go to the area in person," he said, "not through the mail." Zoya turned around and looked at him with slight surprise. "What is the difference?" Pavel was silent for a second. "I want to explain the context," he answered. "So that it's not just paper. There are living people there, on both sides. If I just send the report by mail, they will decide without me and without understanding what was happening here. Zoya looked at him. Then she turned back to the stove. The kettle began to hum quietly. She didn't say anything. But the shoulders dropped a little, just a little, as they do when something that they've been holding for a long time can finally be released. Fyodor was in the yard, knocking out a board on the shed, hitting with a hammer measuredly and methodically, like a man who has a job and does it. The blows echoed through the quiet morning air, evenly, almost soothingly. Zoya stopped at the gate. "Dad, I need to talk to you." Fyodor lowered the hammer. He looked at her face, at the way she held her arms along her body, at the fact that the jacket was buttoned up to the throat, although it was not cold. Something in his gaze switched slowly, like the heavy lever switches. He put the hammer on the board. "Speak," he said. Zoya came closer. She wasn't talking about the report or about Pavel. She was talking to herself, and it seems Fyodor didn't expect it. "I went to him and felt like a spy," she said evenly. "Each time. I didn't like it." "I didn't send you to do anything bad," Fyodor answered calmly, firmly, like a person who was convinced of this. "You sent me to lie," said Zoya. "Let it be silently, without words. But to lie. Coming to a person with one on his face and the other behind his back." Fyodor fell silent. He raised the hammer, put it down again without hitting. "Get out of his area, Dad," Zoya said quietly but clearly. "Please. I ask." She said the last word. The way they pronounce a word that they are not used to using, carefully, as they take something fragile from a shelf. Fyodor was silent for a long time. He looked at his daughter, and in that look there was something that was not there before. He saw in front of him not the girl whom he taught to read traces, and not a tool that did not work. He saw a person who looks straight and says what he thinks, not what is expected from her. This was new. And a little uncomfortable, like it can be inconvenient when something familiar suddenly turns out to be completely different from what you always thought it was. "Are you asking because of him?" he asked quietly. "Because of myself," Zoya answered. Fyodor looked at her for a long time, as he looks when they want to find something in the words that is not there, and do not find it. Then he turned away. He took the hammer. He brought it to the nail and lowered it without hitting. "I'll think about it," he said. It was not yes, but it was not no either. Zoya, who grew up next to this man, knew the value of his every word, heard the difference. She nodded. She went to the gate. From behind the hammer began to knock again, evenly, measuredly, like a metronome. Pavel returned from the area on the 5th day. He walked through the site on foot, as always, not the short way, but his own, as a worker. At the 3rd cordon he stopped. There were no traps. Not one, neither in the northern corner, nor in the black hole, nor along the salt lick, where he saw them for the first time. The land was untouched, the foliage had not been moved. The track from an ATV at the edge of the protected area, old, washed out at the edges, for 5 days, no less. Pavel stood. Looked around, slowly, out of habit, from north to south. Then he took out a magazine. Found today's page and wrote carefully, as he always wrote, no traces of poaching were found in the northern area. Made a point. This has not meant that everything had been decided. The report had been submitted, and what would come out of it no longer depended on him. This did not mean that Fyodor had become a different person or that the forest was now safe forever. It meant only one thing: something had moved. Just a little, one step, but it had moved. One step, this was no longer the place where he stood before. He closed the magazine and went home. In the evening Pavel sat with a book, the same one that he never finished reading for the entire time that I was here. Not because it was bad, there was just always something that prevented me from reaching the end. It was warm in the hut, the stove was blowing evenly, outside the window it was getting dark slowly, like autumn, reluctantly, as if the day itself did not want to end. There was a knock on the door 3 times, leisurely, the same ones. He put the book aside. Got up. He went to the door and stopped for a second before opening it. Just like that, for no reason. Opened it. Zoya stood on the threshold. Not wet, this time dry, without a lantern. It was still a little light, but enough to see her face. She looked at him silently, and in this silence there was no question, no explanation, no expectation. Just her, on the threshold. Like the very first time, when she stood wet in the rain, with a lantern in her hand and said a memorized phrase. And not at all like then, because now she came on her own, without instructions, without a task, without anything behind her. Pavel stepped back from the door. Cleared the passage. "There is tea," he said. Zoya entered. The door closed behind her, quietly, without a bang, as they close when they don't want to scare away something that is just beginning. Outside the window, the forest stood motionless in the last evening light, dark, calm, familiar. One who doesn't need to explain anything and is in no hurry. Thanks for watching. What do you think about this story? Share your impressions. Your comment is very valuable to us.